Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent, but he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying, "Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied and said to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way. Your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, is everybody comfortable? Is it too cold in here with these windows open? Is this okay? If somebody's cold, that doesn't matter. You can shut off. That'd be fine. Our gospel today is healing of Bartimaeus, and it is the restoration of sight. This is a gospel all about seeing. Obviously, the quintessential question that comes framed out of this gospel is, how do we see? Do we see Jesus? And how do we see Jesus? The gospel begins with Jesus leaving Jericho. We, of course, are in the Gospel of Mark. And Mark, in his typical Marconian style, does not really tell you what happened in Jericho. Remember now, Mark is very basic. He doesn't give a lot of details. We are headed to the end of another liturgical year. Soon we will be switching from cycle B, which is what we're in, Mark, to cycle C, which is Luke. A lot more descriptive than Mark, by the way. Great storyteller, Luke. Good Samaritan, Luke. Prodigal son, Luke. We're going to have a good time with Luke. But we're still here in Mark. And Mark is very sparse with his detail. He doesn't tell you what happened coming out of Jericho, but obviously something must have, because there's a sizable crowd. And Bartimaeus is at his normal post. Bartimaeus is blind. That's a significant physical handicap. As a result of that, he is a social outcast. He is untouchable. He is unclean. If you bumped into Bartimaeus accidentally, you would have to go through ritual cleansing before you could properly worship again. But it's kind of a catch-22, because while he is reviled as clearly a sinner, maybe not Bartimaeus, maybe his father, maybe his father's father, but somebody did something wrong to upset God, because that's why he's blind. And as crazy of a theology as you think that might be 2,000 years later, it's the same thing when we see somebody standing on the side of the road with a cardboard sign, and that subconscious thought of, well, they probably deserve that. They probably did something to get to that position. But Bartimaeus is considered to be untouchable. So there he is on the side of the road, the lowest level of social stratus. And Jesus starts to come by. Jesus of Nazareth. We don't know how he knows that Jesus of Nazareth is coming, but he is clearly coming, and he calls out to him. Now, I want to talk about titles for just a second. My real name is John Chapin Engler Jr. That's my given name. I'm named after my father. But ever since I was a little kid, I always went by my middle name, Chapin. As a priest, I'm Father Chapin. But if I was not ordained, my name would be Chapin. But you could call me Chapin from White Sulphur Springs. This would be a normal title in the ancient world. And that is what people are calling Jesus. He is Jesus of Nazareth. Now, as a side note, it's kind of interesting that the title that Jesus most refers to himself as is Son of Man, which we could go, there's a wonderful bunny trail there, but I'm not going to go there. We're going to talk about the fact that he's referred to as Jesus of Nazareth, clearly, period. Everybody. Except that one time. That one time on the Mount Caesarea Philippi, you might have remembered that when Peter was illuminated clearly and called him Messiah, Son of God. But that's it. That's the only time. Other than that, he is Jesus of Nazareth. But here you have this blind man, this social outcast, that is calling him Jesus, Son of David, which is clearly a messianic title, and it's the highest Christological title in the Bible. And this blind guy gets it. He shares the same illumination that Peter received on the Mount Caesarea Philippi. He calls him Jesus, Son of David. Must have got his attention, but it's also a dangerous title, because Josephus tells us that during this time there was at least one revolt a year that was violently put down by the Romans, and they were dealt with very severely. And all of these revolts had one thing in common. Their leader was referred to as Messiah. So, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me, is a dangerous title, and it's a very revealing title. So Jesus, as he's making his way, and of course they're trying to stop him. They're saying, be quiet, leave him alone. Much like we see throughout the scriptures, persistence. Like the crowd in front of the house in Capernaum when they had to make the hole in the roof and lift down the paralyzed man, the 4 men that were carrying him on the mat. They persisted. In the same way, this blind man persists, even though he's being told to be quiet. Now, if you've ever seen the President of the United States travel, he brings quite an entourage. It's usually the limousine. There are several limousines in front and behind, and there's all these police motorcycle escorts. And did you know that when Air Force One flies, that another Air Force One exactly like it flies behind it, just in case something breaks in the first one? I'm serious. This is how our president travels. Imagine the president was traveling, and all of a sudden he stopped with a big crowd, got out of his motorcade, and then pointed to a guy homeless about 15 rows back in a crowd, said, bring me him. That's essentially what was going on here, because Jesus had a tremendous entourage around him. Nobody's paying attention to this guy, and he stops and he says, bring me that man. So they run to him and they say, take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you. Which we should open up our minds to that, because this is very much relevant to us today, 2,000 years later. Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you. And so what does the guy do? He jumps up and he throws his cloak off, the only thing that he had, just throws it to the side. I imagine there's a bunch of other beggars running around there, probably snatched it up, and he didn't care, he got it. And he threw everything that he had aside. He sprang to his feet, and he came running to Jesus. Which kind of reminds me of that rich young ruler we had not too many weeks ago, when Jesus said, sell everything that you have and come follow me. And he went away sad because he had a lot of stuff, and he didn't want to do that. Blessed are the poor, right? So he only had this cloak. He throws it aside, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? Which is an odd question to me. I can just see a disciple kind of lean over, well, Jesus, he's blind. But when you think about it, it's not that unusual a question, because people see Jesus in many different ways. Remember, some see him as a teacher, some see him as a prophet, some see him as a healer, some see him as a messianic warrior that's going to usher in the messianic age. Some see him this way and that. So he clarified, what do you want? And of course he says, I want to see. Jesus says, go on your way, your faith has saved you. Not that I have saved you, but your faith in me. It's a fine line, but worth distinguishing. has saved you. And it ends by saying, and he followed him along the way. And the way is not just the path that Jesus happened to be walking that day. The way was the way that Christianities were referred to in the ancient world, the first century. The word Christian wasn't even invented until the 2nd century in Antioch. So for the first 150 years, people that followed Jesus were known as followers of the way. So following him on the way is following Jesus and doing what he was called to do by Jesus. So that's how it ends. But what does it mean to us? Because most of us here, and I see Bill is not here because he would be the one exception, but most of us here are not physically blind. But many of us are spiritually blind. We're spiritually blind when we profess a Christianity that is not reflected in the way that we live. We're spiritually blind when we come to church each and every week and the gospel, we hear the gospels, we hear what Christ is trying to teach us, yet we shut our minds to the message. We're spiritually blind when we judge other people as being less than us, and somehow we are different than them. We are spiritually blind when we lack the ability to forgive those of whom we hold resentments towards. We're spiritually blind in so many, many ways. But the good news is this: that same Holy Spirit that illuminated Peter on Mount Caesarea Philippi, that same Holy Spirit that illuminated this blind man on the side of the road, that same Holy Spirit is available to illuminate you today, right here, right now. All we need to say is, Jesus, I want to see you. Lead me. Lead me to the life that you want me to live. Knock, my friends, the door will be open. Seek